Now it's time to introduce our two speakers. Robert Nordland is the founder and CEO of Association Reserves and a certified reserve specialist. Association Reserves has prepared over 30,000 reserve studies for associations in 47 states over the last 27 years. He regularly writes on the topic of reserve studies and speaks at industry functions throughout the nation. Robert leads our corporate office in Calabasas, California, a suburb of Los Angeles, and supervises technical standards throughout our network of 10 Association Reserves regional offices. Since 1997, Julie Ademan has been president of Ademan Inc., a consulting and employment firm specializing in the community management industry. Julie is also a nationally known author, publisher, speaker, and educator in the community association management industry. She is known for publishing the HOA Manager Newsline, an industry newsletter with a monthly circulation of over 17,000, and is the producer of the Manager Minute, a series of popular short videos now available on YouTube. And now I'd like to turn the floor over to Robert Nordland. Robert?
Hello, everyone. Sorry for the delay. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Julie, can I get you to say hello so everyone can hear your voice?
Hello, everyone.
Hey there. Julie and I are here today to save you some anxiety and to help make this your smoothest budget season ever. I've been an avid reader of Julie's Manager Newsline for years, and we regularly see each other while attending or speaking at CAI national conferences. I enjoy Julie's insights and her ability to clearly speak the truth as she gathers and shares wisdom from her years in the community association management business. So it's a real treat to have her with us today. Julie and I will start today's program laying the groundwork with some wise principles and common problems to avoid, eventually getting to a time where we can answer your questions, those that were submitted in advance and those that you've typed in while we're speaking. Our objective is to help your days go smoother, help your meetings end earlier, and help your associations to thrive. So without further delay, let's get to today's program. I expect you've joined us as a board member, manager, or other industry professional because budgets are the way you create your own future. And as a seasonal task, they're prepared in addition to all your other normal ongoing activities. Because of this, budget season is often stressful. So we're here today to answer your questions, minimize your stress, and set you up for success. Both Julie and I see board members and managers trying to move their association successfully into the future, often armed with good intentions and minimal training, but wishful thinking will only get you so far. Preparing a budget is a real minefield, and there's so many ways you can foul up. Today we're going to focus on the reserves portion of the budget, where the typical board member and manager has the least experience. And that's because the typical association needs 15 to 40% of their total budget going to reserves, so it's a major portion of the average association's budget. So in today's educational session, we're going to help take you from uncertainty to confidence, arming you with the tools that will help you have a more successful budget preparation experience. Now, even though you're not in the room with us, I want to make sure we're making this session interactive and keeping your attention. So look in your webinar control panel, which looks kind of like the image on the slide, and you'll see an icon that looks like a hands raised. It's where the red arrow is pointing. Clicking that will electronically raise your hand. So let's test it out. Grab your mouse and click on the hands raised icon to show that you're ready to get going on this program today. Click on the hands raised. Oh, fantastic. Very nice. Okay, I'm going to put everyone's hands down. Thanks for the feedback. By the way, as Paige mentioned, there's a little dialog box right below. You'll see the arrow pointing to that now, and that's where you can type in a question for us to answer. Paige will be monitoring that throughout today's session, and we'll get to as many as we can during our Q&A time. And just a note about note-taking. We're going to be moving pretty quickly through today's material, but no worries. We're recording today's session, so you'll be able to watch it again from YouTube if you so choose, or spread the word so others can watch it. In addition, we'll email an outline to I get my flubs out at the beginning. We're going to email an outline to everyone who fills out our brief survey at the end of today's presentation. So, now that I've stumbled, Julie, you take it away.
Let me stumble now.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody, let's think about the fall of the year for associations with a December 31st fiscal year end. There's a lot to do, it's a very busy time, and you only have so much time, and there's nothing you can do to slow things down. Budget deadlines are going to happen whether you're prepared or not, and the same is true with reserve expenses. The expenses are going to happen whether you are prepared or not. So to address the first issue of the day, adequate reserve contributions are important because they prevent special assessments. They also prevent deferred maintenance, increase reserve costs, and prevent lower property values. Nothing good comes from failing to make adequate reserve contributions. The problems don't go away. They only get worse when boards kick the can down the road for future boards, owners, and managers to deal with. Reserve expenses are real expenses. They are not imaginary. They may seem imaginary, but they're not. And boards are foolish to think that those expenses can be ignored without consequences. Your thoughts on that, Robert?
Well, first off, I want to make it clear that you don't make reserve contributions or prepare a reserve study because the law says so. You find out what size of, it's a practical need. You find out what size of reserve contributions are adequate with a reserve study. That's why you prepare a reserve study. And you make those contributions for 4 reasons. First is fairness, so everyone pays their fair share along the way with nobody getting penalized or getting taken advantage of by a special assessment that all of a sudden forces them to pay for a project that had been deteriorating for years, often in plain sight. And like you said, Julie, those expenses always happen even when the association isn't financially prepared. And there's cost. Deferred maintenance is expensive. The best way to minimize your reserve contributions is to keep your costs down, which means avoiding deferred maintenance. Making adequate reserve contributions so the money is available when needed actually helps your association save money. And maximizing property values. Don't allow that ugly deferred maintenance to drag down property values. That's the most expensive reserve funding mistake you can make. And finally, making adequate reserve contributions is part of satisfying the business judgment rule. That's the legal standard board member decisions are measured against. It's a 3-part test that, when satisfied, it minimizes board member liability exposure. But one of the first issues is timing. When do you begin starting on this project? When do you begin thinking about budgets?
Well, truly, budgeting is something you do as managers and the board all year long. Your budget is a guide, think of it that way, and you see along the way through the year how well your budget is preparing you for the reality not only of this year, but the next year. You should be paying attention on a monthly basis, noting which line items are healthy, which ones are getting behind. But as far as actually working on the new budget, a successful strategy, managers, listen up, is to start 6 months prior to your fiscal year end. I know it sounds like a long time, but no, it works very well. That means for associations with a December 31st fiscal year end, you should be gathering up your information in June and working on your budget beginning July 1st. Again, I know it sounds early, but starting early is the key to success and the key to lower stress for you managers and you board members.
Thanks, Julie. I'd like to hear you address that inevitable conversation the manager has with the board or the board has with the owners about reserves. Do you have some keys to success that you can share on how do they explain in a convincing way that appropriately sized reserve contributions are worth making and often worth an increase in homeowner assessments?
Oh, boy, you know, this can be one of those minefields, but really it is relatively easy to get through successfully. But first, let's go to our audience for their ideas on the subject. Paige, can you launch the Objections to Reserve Contributions poll?
Absolutely. There you go. It's launched. Go ahead and make your selection. All right, the answers are still coming in. There you go.
Yes, interesting, interesting. But I'll tell you that these results are typical. The can't afford them aspect of it is usually number one and has been for years and years. Robert, I think you're going to address the issue of expense in a few minutes, but from my point of view, from the management point of view, I want to address the common objection. Why should I spend money on something that will benefit future owners because I'm not going to be living there when they replace that roof? I mean, we've been hearing the same objection for as long as I've been in the industry. It's 27 long years. And there's no way, listen, there's no way you're going to convince anyone otherwise along this line of thinking. Trying to counter that discussion or that objection hasn't worked successfully, not since I started a long time ago. The future's going to happen, and the person complaining truly might not be there when the roof, the elevator, the asphalt resurfacing, the pool resurfacing, whatever it is, happens. So managers, ditch that discussion that doesn't work. The key here is to completely redefine the problem and reframe the discussion. The roof is deteriorating. We all know that. The carpet is getting worn out, and the road will need resurfacing. No doubt about any of those things. Reframe the conversation to the here and now, not the future. Reserves aren't for, quote, future expenses. They offset ongoing deterioration. And you know, reserve contributions should be fair. Everyone should pay their fair share, and they should squirm when you remind them that underfunding now means some stranger in the future will be making up for current underfunding, that poor guy left holding the bag. So reframe the discussion to reserve contributions just being the ongoing cost of deterioration. Every day, a little per day, a little per week, a little per month. The association's major reserve components are deteriorating and wearing out. We all know it. And it's only fair that the people using up the life of those components pay their fair share. So that unfortunate new couple who purchased Unit 13, no pun intended, Unit 13, doesn't get stuck with a special assessment when the roof begins to leak. But nobody can launch a strong argument that reserve contributions should be unfair, and no one can launch a strong argument that reserve deterioration isn't happening on an ongoing basis. We all know it is. Bottom line, reserve deterioration is as real an expense as any other expense the association is facing. And to pretend otherwise is honestly foolishness and frankly a breach of fiduciary duty.
So, Julie, it sounds like you're talking about choosing the battles that can be won and just staying away from the discussions that are going to end up being a waste of time and not move the association forward.
Absolutely. There is no reason for any manager or board member to beat their head against the wall on this issue. Choose the discussion that is in the best interest of the association. Components are deteriorating now, and everyone should pay their fair share along the way for the assets that are deteriorating while they are owning their own homes right now. So, okay, Robert, it's time for you to address the other point, that reserve contributions are, quote, too expensive.
Okay, well, that's another issue where success is found in how you frame the conversation. If people have grown comfortable with small reserve contributions at their association, anything larger is going to seem like a lot or, relatively speaking, too much. But like you said, deterioration is ongoing. The main flaw with people being reluctant to increase their reserve contributions to an appropriate level is that they think they have a choice. That's like waving the white flag, surrendering to underfunding the reserves at their association. They think that reserve contributions are a luxury, like a sports car or a boat. But in truth, the reserve deterioration happens every day, whether you like it or not. Every association pays for reserve deterioration, either on an ongoing basis through budgeted contributions or later on through special assessments, loans, or in lost home value. It's really not a choice. The expense always happens. There's no choice involved. Take a look at this. Believing that you can't afford reserve contributions doesn't stop the deterioration from occurring, and it doesn't stop the repair and replacement costs. This is a photo of an association that didn't think they could afford to care for their asphalt. And so let me get your feedback here. Show me by clicking the hands raised button if you think that the asphalt deterioration kept on going at this association, even though the association thought it couldn't afford it. Hands raised if you think asphalt deterioration kept on going. Good. We've got an observant group here. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to put hands down. So this is the key. Expenses occur. There's no such thing as saying we can't afford them. If you live in the association, those expenses are part of the cost of living in the association. You can't escape those expenses. Saying that you can't afford adequate reserve contributions or supporting that line of thinking just kicks the can down the road and forces someone else to pay for your share of the cost of deterioration. Okay, well, let's talk about real money here. Typical condo or townhome association reserve contributions are in the range of $3 or $4 a day per unit, just about the cost of a premium coffee. Plan development and homeowner associations typically have lower reserve contributions since each owner pays each owner pays for the care of their own home, and that's less burden on the association. And of course, high-rises and associations with more extensive assets are going to need higher contributions. But it boils down either way to just a few dollars per day. Again, that's really not a lot of cash. So when someone says we can't afford adequate reserve contributions, again, what they're really saying is I'll pay it later as part of a special assessment, or I'll get the next owner of my home to pay for it.
Yeah, but let's get back to the real world. Most associations have budget limitations. Like you said, Robert, they've gotten comfortable with their $225 a month or $350 a month or whatever their association dues are. And realistically, we know homeowners are going to resist any increase. The association already has a few owners that are delinquent, and the board is reluctant to increase the dues very much because they're afraid that would press more owners into delinquency, or they're afraid of the political consequences of raising assessments. So you're putting managers and board members into a very tough spot by suggesting they have to make adequate contributions. I don't think it's going to fly in the real world. I don't think people attending this webinar are going to suddenly change their budgets and start making adequate reserve contributions.
Well, Julie, you're right. Let me take a few minutes to walk everyone through that. What we're dealing with here is obviously people are naturally resistant to change, and it's natural to object when the board or the management company or the manager is stuck saying that it's time to raise the assessments. But I believe there's a lot more fear than truth in that whole we can't afford it argument. Again, it's just a few dollars a day. My major concern is with associations to just throw up their hands and resign themselves to doing nothing, and that'll get them special assessments and deferred maintenance. It doesn't have to be that way. And the key here is that the typical underfunded association took years getting into their underfunded state, and it's reasonable actually to take a few years to get out of that problem. So what we've been recently talking about is a $10 solution, and what I mean by that is where underfunded associations raise their dues $10 a month, all going to reserves, and that amounts to about 33 cents a day more going towards reserves. Make these size of increases annually for just 3 or 5 years. That's going to strengthen the reserve fund and go a long way towards making sure everyone's paying their fair share. Like I said earlier, appropriately sized reserve contributions are a big chunk of the budget, 15 to 40% range of a typical association's budget. You don't have to get there all at once. You can take regular, I want to say, baby steps. So for most associations, it will likely be a multi-year process of tolerable annual increases. Okay, well, let's take a quick break here to get some audience feedback as we change topics. Paige, get set, launch a poll about reserve study results. I'm pretty sure people expect to get a reserve contribution recommendation from their reserve study, but that's just the final of 3 results. So let's find out what our audience thinks is the first result from a reserve study. And I'll give you a hint. It's something we sometimes call the foundation of the reserve study.
All right, Robert, the votes are still coming in. Let's give it a few more seconds. All right, here are your results.
Paige, I can't see. Can I get you to talk them through for me?
Absolutely. 10% said type of reserve study, 4% said year of reserve study, 74% said reserve component list, and 11% said percent funded.
Excellent. Okay, well, we've got a lot of people who are on the ball, so thanks. So that may be people who've been with us before. That may be the gradual process of people getting more and more aware of the parts of a reserve study. Julie.
Well, look, the recommendation, my turn now, the recommended contributions.
This is live webinar.
It is. It's live TV, folks. The recommended contributions are clearly what managers look for first, because so much of the time managers are looking to the reserve study for budget guidance. But let me put this idea forth. The association is trying to get successfully to the future. The three results from a reserve study work together. You need to see the three results in perspective. The reserve component list, the one everybody mentioned, is like the map. The mountains of the obstacles or the expenses the association is going to face. The percent funded tells where they are on the map, if they're on pace or behind pace with respect to getting to their destination. And the recommended contributions are kind of like the speedometer, how fast you need to travel to successfully get to your destination.
Thanks, Julie. Very nice. Another way we look at it, another reason the reserve component list is called the foundation is because the other two results are calculated based on it. So it's important for managers and boards to look at the component list. And because it's important, let me give everyone a quick reminder how reserve study professionals select your reserve components, and it's based on National Reserve Study standards. It's a pretty straightforward four-part test that a project needs to meet in order to be appropriate for funding through reserves. Look on screen. It needs to be a common area maintenance responsibility. It needs to be life limited with a predictable remaining useful life and above a minimum threshold of significance. What I want to emphasize is that managers and board members should keep this in mind when they're reviewing their component list for completeness. Having multiple sets of eyes on this really helps us make sure nothing is missed and no projects appear both in the reserve budget and the operating budget.
The reserve component list, like the example on the screen that just came up here, is also a great heads up for the managers. It's another opportunity where you as managers can step up and be a hero, or really more likely just be the professional that you are. The reserve component list helps you know what big projects are coming up so you can prepare the board to spend some significant money and to get proposals in advance for them and all the things you need to do to help the association run smoothly. Really, it's all in a day's work for you managers. If you sit back and do nothing, it's as good as wearing a sign that, hey, I don't care. So knowing the reserve component list also helps keep you from being surprised. You're able to operate more proactively instead of reactively, and we are a very reactive business, so as much as we can stay away from reactive and move to proactive, always a good thing. But just like with budget season, one of the keys is starting early, folks. Knowing the upcoming projects on the reserve component list helps you managers look sharp and helps you be a good guide to the association, and frankly, it's your job.
Okay. Well, let me spend just a minute helping our attendees with the other two results, the association's percent funded and the recommended reserve contribution rate. We talked about the assets deteriorating on an ongoing basis. When a roof has used up half its life, it's easy to understand the value of that deterioration is about half of its replacement cost. Percent funded is all about comparing the cash in the reserve fund to that value of current deterioration at the association. It's a comparison that associations do once a year as of the first day of the fiscal year. That comparison is the association's percent funded, and it reveals if you have more deterioration than cash or more cash than deterioration. In our experience with associations over the last 27 years, about 70% of associations are underfunded with more deterioration than cash.
Yeah, that sounds about right. We know that most associations have been underfunding their reserves for years. I think in my years of management, I only had one association that ever came close to funding its reserves fully. I hope that some of the concepts we've talked about today can get the folks on a path to gradually building their reserve contributions. So in a few years, there will be more well-funded associations and far fewer special assessments. Let me ask the audience, by a show of hands, grab your little mouse and get ready. Raise your hand if you'd like less chance of a special assessment at your association and a better reputation in general.
Oh boy, that's a popular answer.
Yeah,
hands are going up all across the list.
That was an easy one.
That was an easy one. Okay, I'm going to go hands down here.
Okay, listen, the key, again, is choosing the conversation, stressing fairness, and managers understanding it is their professional duty to guide their association clients, their boards, and the associations as a whole toward this successful future of as closely funded, fully reserves as we can get.
Fantastic. Well, when I think about that subject, I keep thinking about what Peter Drucker said. The best way to predict the future is to create it, and it's all about creating the future. Budget choices, like we've been talking about today, allow an association to create their future. So this is all about making wise choices at budget time. Well, the final result of a reserve study is the recommended contribution rate. It's usually very close to the dollars per month that the assets are deteriorating. Since most associations are underfunded, the contributions are often a little bit higher than the rate of deterioration to help the association catch up with that deteriorated value of the components. It's a little like a race. When the deterioration has gotten ahead of the cash value, you need to pick up the pace with contributions or you'll get a little further behind.
Oh, and that's which brings us back to what we talked about before, not surrendering to the thought that we can't afford it and not buying into the conversation that it's someone else's problem in the future. Deterioration is happening, and if you're not catching up, you're falling further behind. That means deferred maintenance, special assessments, and believe me, longer board meetings with a lot more attention. Those types of meetings are hard for board members and for managers. We don't need more of them.
I can imagine that. I'm certainly glad that I haven't been in a situation where I have to do a whole lot of board meetings, because I can only imagine there's a lot of tension there. Well, thanks, Julie. And that brings us to the end of our prepared materials here today. With the time remaining, Paige is going to coordinate our Q&A session with the questions you've typed in. So, Paige, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Robert. And I'll go ahead. As I mentioned before, you can ask one of our presenters a question by typing your question into the question box at the bottom of your control panel. And Robert, our first question comes from Mary. Legally, how often must associations have financial analysis done?
Well, let me interpret that as a reserve study. There's, I think, now 30 states across the country that have some type of state law talking about reserve studies, but let me roll it back to the business judgment rule. The business judgment rule talks about the board members need to operate in a manner that's in the best interest of the association, in the area of their power and responsibility, and after having made reasonable inquiry when they don't know the answer themselves. And so there's some liability exposure in all 50 states for doing the right thing. And layer that with state laws, and there's a lot of reason for associations getting insight and counsel for how much they should be setting aside with respect to reserves, and that's all called basically this reserve study, this concept of a reserve study.
Great. The next question is from Carolyn. I believe our condo association insurance deductible should be included in our reserves, but our manager says no. That's not usually done. Who is right?
Let me take you back. Let's see how far back it was. The four-part test. There we are. This is the National Reserve Study Standard four-part test. Typically, insurance deductibles fail the test of being predictable because you don't know when the problem is going to occur. So in general, and let me say in general because there's always a specific situation that twists the normal, but in general, insurance deductibles for a hailstorm, fire, flood, or in some areas of the country, earthquake, deductibles fail the test for being an appropriate reserve component.
Okay, next question comes from Bob. What is the penalty, if any, for an HOA that hasn't ever done a reserve study?
Julie?
Well, I think that goes back to what you were saying, Robert. It depends on, first of all, what state you're in. And I think the worst penalty, even if there is no legal penalty, which there really isn't, I mean, as we always say, who's going to get you? The condo cops? But the worst penalty is that, you know, you are not meeting your fiduciary duty in making sure that the association is well cared for into the future. So, Bob, if you have anything, or Robert, if you have anything specific to answer on that, you probably know more that part, but I can just speak from not only an ex-manager and as a consultant, and I am also a board member, believe it or not. No, it's true, it's true. I can tell you that if you're not funding, you're only cheating yourself and you're cheating the people in the future.
Yeah, I tend to tell people that the greatest penalty is special assessments and deferred maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the next question comes from Mike. Are HOA reserves for roofs and painting of homeowner-owned patio homes and townhomes? They are not common property. This does not meet your standard of what to reserve for. What should be done about this?
My quick answer
well,
is if
Bob,
it's not...
I'm sorry, who would... Yeah, so what was the name of the question? Who gave the question? What was his name?
Mike.
Mike.
You go.
Well, two things. I'm sorry, Robert, did you want me to answer that?
You go.
Okay. Well, a couple of things you have to deal with is that, one, the association, if they've been doing that for a long time, if you are the manager or if you're a board member who knows this, you need to bring this to the attention of the board and make sure they understand. It's not in the documents. This is not common area. It's not our responsibility. And, of course, the biggest challenge is getting the entire association to understand that the board will no longer be, the association will no longer be paying for individual units to have these type of things painted. So that's your number one. That's kind of a communications issue. It may take a while, may take several communications, may take a year or two to get people used to that idea, but that's the way to go with that.
Great, thank you. Next question comes from Donna. How do you factor in increased
I lost Paige there.
I lost Paige. Paige, can I get you to repeat the question?
Yep, can you hear me okay?
Now we can.
Have you now? Yes.
Okay. Donna would like to know, how do you factor in increase in cost of living?
Well, that's part of a reserve set. It's just part of the funding plan to make sure that the cash that you're flowing into the reserve fund is going to offset the ongoing deterioration and keep pace with all the things that are happening at the association. So it's the mathematical portion of the software that we're using. It keeps things nicely in balance. So the cash going into reserves is the nice smooth portion. The expenses are irregular at different years in the future, but the interest on reserves on deposit and the inflation on expenses is all part of the balance of making sure that everything works out smoothly.
Okay, we have time for one more question. And as a reminder, if we did not get to your question, we will try emailing you the answer after the webinar. The last question comes from Maureen. What are the pros and cons in obtaining an HOA loan to catch up on major deferred maintenance?
Go ahead, Robert.
Okay. Typically with loans, it's an alternative to a special assessment. If you're in a position at your association where you need a lot of cash very quickly, special assessments and loans are two of your options. Loans tend to be the more expensive of the two because you end up paying interest to the financial institution, whereas special assessments end up just have to pull money out of owners' pockets. But if you can't get a special assessment passed at your association, or if there's other circumstances, then loans are a possible option, but they tend to be an expensive option for the association.
Just real briefly, it's always a political issue. Shall we get a loan? Shall we special assess? Neither is pleasant, but if it is a situation where reserves have been underfunded for so long and a new board is in who is looking at the problems and they need to be dealt with, again, the issue is communication, effective, consistent communication, and open communication with the owners in really selling them on either a special assessment or a loan. None of it's going to be easy, but both are viable options. Just depends on how your politics are and what you can afford.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And now I'd like to turn the mic back to Julie and Robert for a few closing remarks.
Okay, am I up first, Robert?
I guess you're up first.
Okay, I just want to remind everybody out there that having a smooth budget season can be done. I did a manager minute on YouTube about budgeting, and just as Robert has said and I have said in this, we want to start early. The key is planning ahead, and that planning ahead means beginning in June. And hopefully, you guys out there, we've given you some useful tools, some ideas, some concepts maybe you hadn't thought about to help you communicate these important ideas to your boards, your associations, and to the people within them. But the key for you managers is planning ahead. So we're at, what is today, July 21st? Yes, you should already be starting those budgets. You should be starting. It's a key piece of the puzzle if you want to reach your goal of having a smooth and effective budget season while you perform your day job, which never goes away, as you all know. Robert?
Yeah. The last thing I'd like to say is to kind of encapsulate this whole subject from my point of view is what we call the 4 reserve rules. If you understand them and know them, you'll make better decisions, or we believe you'll make better decisions about reserve components, reserve expenses, and reserve contributions. And you see them on screen. Reserve expenses always occur. There's no avoiding them. The board is responsible for the budget and paying the bills, and the reserve expenses only typically get larger if you ignore them and delay them, and the homeowners always get stuck with the bill. So seeing it in that framework, even as we answered those questions just a moment ago, Julie was talking about communication. It's so important for the board to communicate what's going on. Everyone is in the same boat together at the association. So that's the 4 reserve rules. It helps people see everything in perspective. Well, speaking for Julie and myself, I want to thank you for joining us today. It's been our pleasure to give you information so that you can have a little more success at your association. I want to also encourage people to go to Julie's website at www.adaman-inc.com and sign up for Julie's informative newsletter. I've enjoyed reading it for years, and you'll find some great time-saving tips and wisdom, and she's sharing that on an ongoing basis. And if you have additional questions about reserve studies or need a proposal, please go to the Association Reserves website at www.reservestudy.com. Look for the links to our Learning Center or get a proposal by simply clicking the Request a Proposal link. I hope that we've been able to guide you and help you, and I don't know if it's going to be a smoother budget season or less gray hair or just more success at your association, but I just hope that we've been able to point you in the right direction.